How's it going, all you Sioux High Earth Science students? Yep, this is Mr. McLeod again. Welcome to our next podcast on biogeochemical cycling. More specifically, the cycling of the element carbon on our planet. Today we will look at how and where carbon is stored on our planet and how it gets recycled. So get your notes out, something to write with, and let's carbonate. See what I did there? Okay, let's get on with it. Okay, so the movement of carbon atoms within the Earth's ecosystems keeps the carbon and our environment in equilibrium. Write that down. Now the picture you see here shows the many ways carbon is stored on the Earth. Please reproduce this diagram in your notes as best you can right now. So take a look at this graph and let's get some critical information into your notes from it. First of all, carbon is stored in several ways on the Earth. These are referred to as reservoirs or sinks. Please get those two words in your notes. Reservoir, and you see reservoir right here. These are also sometimes referred to as sinks. They kind of accomplish the same thing. But a sink may give you a better picture of what a reservoir actually is. What this graph shows is the movement of carbon atoms within the Earth's 6 main carbon reservoirs. Notice they are listed from highest concentration on the left, right here, to lowest concentration on the right. I'd like you to list them in your notes like you see them here and be able to rank them properly on Friday's quiz. So do that now. So what I mean is the middle to deep ocean is where most of the carbon is stored. Get that in your notes. And then you also need to write that for the most part, carbon is actually stored in a very familiar molecule, CO2 or carbon dioxide. Please write that in your notes as well. In fact, most of the global carbon is stored as a carbon compound of some kind. Also write that down. So make sure you get these all in your notes ranked from most to least, and that you understand that most of the carbon is stored in other molecules, for example, carbon dioxide and other things. Now, I'd also like you to know some carbon processes, and you see those down here now at the bottom of the slide. So let's list those in your notes, and then we're going to talk about them in a little bit more detail later on in the podcast. So some of them you're familiar with, like photosynthesis and cellular respiration, and maybe even combustion, like the burning of gasoline in a combustion engine. But then there's also decay, like dead leaves are being decayed by bacteria, sedimentation, like when rocks are weathered, and then compaction and dissolving. And we'll talk about all those in this podcast. But list them right now so that you have them in your notes. Now let's look at the global concentration of carbon by percentage and get these in your notes as well. As you can see from this slide, 72% of the global supply of carbon is contained in the oceans. Write that down and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a bit. Then 22% of the global carbon is contained in fossil fuels like natural gas and petroleum products like gasoline. Also get that down in your notes. Then finally, 4.2% of it is stored in living and dead decaying organisms. So get that in your notes. While the final 1.2% is stored in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. Also get that in your notes. Now, I'd also like you to get this pie chart in your notes. So look at the pie chart here on the right-hand side and create a pie chart so that you'll recognize it when you see it on a quiz. So go ahead and do that right now. Let's start with a couple of very familiar chemical equations that will illustrate the cycling of carbon in the atmosphere. First, let's take a look at photosynthesis. And you see how to spell photosynthesis right here, and from biology class you at least should have heard of that process. Photosynthesis is the process by which plants use the energy in sunlight to manufacture or make sugar. Write that down. Now, a little more specifically, plants use the carbon and carbon dioxide molecules located in the atmosphere to make sugar. So also write that down. So they're using the carbon and carbon dioxide that you see here to ultimately make sugar, which is right over here. They call it biomass, but C6H12O6 is the chemical formula for glucose, which is a sugar. So in essence, plants remove excess carbon dioxide or scrub carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and use it to make sugar or food. Now that's good for us because too much carbon dioxide can be harmful to us heterotrophs. So get that in your notes. So they use the CO2 from the atmosphere to make sugar, and they scrub it for us so we don't breathe too much carbon dioxide in the air. So get those two things down in your notes. Okay, so if plants remove the CO2 from the atmosphere, well, how does it get back there? Otherwise, the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere would have run out, right? So cellular respiration. So write that down, cellular respiration, you see it right here. Cellular respiration is the process by which living organisms break down, or sometimes you hear it called burn, organic compounds like sugar for energy. Write that down. Now, by doing this, these organisms then release carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere as a byproduct. So it's the opposite now equation of photosynthesis. So we see how the arrow goes both ways. If it goes this way, then it's photosynthesis. If the equation goes this way from right to left, it's respiration. So here you see carbon dioxide being given off during the respiration process. Here you're seeing it being used in photosynthesis. So make sure you understand that photosynthesis uses or scrubs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and cellular respiration releases it back into the atmosphere. Now that creates a cycle. Plants take in carbon dioxide in photosynthesis, and all organisms give it off in cellular respiration. So make sure you get that little cycling sentence in your notes. Okay, so that's how we cycle carbon in our atmosphere. Now let's take a look at other methods carbon is cycled. In the geologic carbon cycle that you see here, carbon moves between rocks and minerals, seawater, and the atmosphere. Write that down. So carbon moves between rocks and minerals, seawater, and the atmosphere. So write that down, and we'll talk a little bit more specifically about this after you do. So let's take a closer look at how this works. Now I'd like you to get this sequence of events in your notes one step at a time in the correct order. So I'm gonna number them 1 through 6, and I want you to make sure they're in the correct order, and then we'll point them out in this diagram. Step 1. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere reacts with some minerals to form the mineral calcium carbonate, also called limestone. So that's this reaction right here. So CaCO3 is calcium carbonate, also known as limestone. So carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, okay, that's out here in our atmosphere, reacts with some minerals to form calcium carbonate. Write that down. And we'll talk in a lot more detail when we talk about the rock cycle, but we're not talking about the rock cycle necessarily right now. Step 2. This mineral calcium carbonate or limestone is then dissolved by rainwater and carried to the oceans. So it's dissolved by rainwater and carried to the ocean. So you see it here. Rain washes the carbon dioxide out of the air. So it's rain washes the carbon dioxide out of the air, and then it's carried down here. You see the oceans carried down here into the ocean. So get that down as step 2. Step 3. Now, once the carbon dioxide's in the oceans, it precipitates or becomes a solid we call a deposit and falls out of the ocean water, forming layers of sediment on the seafloor. So right here now, you see the sediments now falling out onto the seafloor. So now the seafloor starts to build up the sediment now that has precipitated out or become a solid out of the rocks. Step 4. Now, as the Earth's plates move through the process of plate tectonics we're just talking about right now, these sediments are subducted underneath the continents. So now you see the ocean crust now subducting or diving under now the continental crust. And as that happens, they get remelted. You should know that now from the Plate Tectonics podcast. So these sediments now get melted back because of subduction. Make sure you get that as step 4. Now, step 5. Under the great heat and pressure far below the Earth's surface, the limestone melts, reacts with other minerals, releasing the carbon dioxide through volcanism. So now, once this rock limestone melts, it becomes less dense, and boom, right up here through this fissure, the carbon dioxide is released back into the atmosphere through volcanism. So make sure you get that down there as step 5. Finally, then, the carbon dioxide is then re-emitted into the atmosphere through an eruption. Now you see why it's a cycle. So now the carbon dioxide that started here gets back into the air, rain washes it out, and starts the whole process over again. So there's the geologic carbon cycle. So make sure you get all 6 of those steps in there. Now, I'd also like you to get this diagram in your notes. I know you're doing lots of diagrams, so don't roll your eyes and shake your head, because you're going to see this on the quiz. I want you to understand it. It's not that hard a diagram to put in your notes, so take a minute, write it in your notes exactly like you see it, and label it correctly. Okay, just a brief mention of human impacts on the environment, more specifically on the environmental load of carbon. This is an illustration of how the various activities we all take part in has some effect on the atmosphere in some of the major ways humans contribute to carbon dioxide levels. So I want you to get some examples. Flying, driving our cars, and factories are the 3 main ways that humans impact the carbon dioxide level. So get those in your notes. Okay, last slide. Geologists refer to long and short-term carbon cycles. Let's get those in your notes and some examples. Long-term carbon cycle components work extremely slowly, therefore their changes are very gradual. Get that in your notes. Now, some examples are sedimentation due to erosion, volcanic release, and weathering. So get those 3 examples of long-term carbon cycle components. Now, short-term carbon cycle components are those whose effect is felt relatively quickly. Get that in your notes. And then 3 examples of short term would be the ocean uptake and release of carbon dioxide, photosynthesis, and respiration. So get those 3 examples in your notes. What this means is that natural changes to the carbon cycle have been very slow compared to the rate at which humans are adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. Also write that down. Now the red arrow you see in this picture represents rapid fossil fuel burning, and that indicates the main ways humans affect the carbon cycle. Carbon dioxide levels are increasing because the natural system can't keep pace with this new emission source. Get that in your notes. In other words, we're producing carbon dioxide at a faster rate than the natural processes can scrub it or get it out of the atmosphere. So the natural processes that permanently remove this additional carbon, mainly ocean uptake and sedimentation, work extremely slowly compared to how much we're making. So make sure you get that down. Okay, that's it. Submit your notes to Moodle, go grab that study guide, and get to work on the questions. Talk to you soon.